In this video, we're going to discuss the difference between participative budgeting and traditional budgeting. So when we think about the difference between these two methods, really it comes down to where the budgeted numbers come from. So in the traditional budgeting method, we've got the CEO or some executive manager, executive level is giving the numbers, the budgeted numbers, kind of dictating them to the frontline managers. When I say a frontline manager, what I'm talking about is, like, for example, a plant manager, somebody who's actually doing the work, doing more of the hands-on work, or maybe managing the people who are doing some of the hands-on work in the plant or in the manufacturing area. And you've got kind of the CEO, you picture more, they're in the executive suite, kind of, meeting with people, discussing overall organization strategy, right? So when you have this situation where the executives, we'll just put here, executive level, when the executives are kind of dictating the budgeted numbers and saying, okay, look, for example, let's say that the frontline manager, let's actually take the example, let's say a sales manager. So a sales manager. So who has a better idea of what sales are going to be next quarter? Is it the sales manager who's working directly with the salespeople on a day-to-day basis? Or is it going to be the CEO who is more dealing with organization-wide strategy, working with different departments, coordinating? It's probably going to be the person who's closer to the action, right? The frontline manager, the sales manager is probably going to have a better pulse, a better finger on what the sales are going to be in the coming quarter. So if the CEO, who's kind of maybe more detached from these frontline activities, if the CEO just kind of dictates to the sales manager, okay, well, we need to sell 30,000 units next quarter. That's the budgeted sales amount. We're going to budget that we're going to sell 30,000 units. That's the number. It's just coming from the CEO with no input from the frontline manager. We have several problems with that, right? So it's not going to be as accurate. So this is not as accurate, right? Because the sales manager probably has a better idea of some of the things that they have boots on the ground, so to speak, right? And they have a better idea. They're closer to the action than maybe the CEO. And so the numbers are not as accurate. And also, because the numbers might not be as accurate, so let's say that it's unrealistic. It's just this really high sales amount. So let's say the CEO says 50,000 units, right? And that we budget to sell 50,000 units. And the sales manager knows that in reality, you can only sell like maybe 20,000 units. Like realistically, no matter how hard we try, just that's the reality of the situation. We'll try for more, but probably it's going to be 20,000. And they're thinking, well, I'm going to be evaluated based on whether or not I meet this 50 that the CEO, they just threw that number at me, right? That's in the budget. And they say, you know what? I'm never going to meet that 50 no matter what. So you've demotivated this person, right? So you've hurt morale. You've hurt morale because you gave them something. You gave this manager this target, right? This kind of target that is just unrealistic, right? So because of unrealistic target, people just kind of, I don't want to say give up, but they just resign themselves to the idea that they're not even going to meet this. So why strive as hard? Whereas, for example, let's say they came up with this idea of 20, then they're working really hard to meet the 20 because they know, hey, if I work hard, I can meet this 20. Right? But at 50, it's like, I'm never even going to meet it, so why even bother? So you've demotivated these people. So what we've seen over time is a shift from traditional budgeting, right? So here's the traditional budgeting method, just kind of top down from the CEO, just dictating to the people below. We've seen a shift to this participative budgeting, right? And now what we're seeing is it's more collaborative approach, right? Let me change colors here. So we're seeing a more collaborative approach. The idea being that, okay, let's take the information from these frontline managers, right? These frontline managers have information, important information about what these budgeted numbers should be. They have a good idea. They can inform the CEO and say, hey, look, realistically, here's what we can expect, right? So we can get more accurate info. So it's more accurate. But then also we have higher motivation. Not just because the info is more accurate and more realistic targets, but also because kind of the psychological benefit of the frontline managers being excited about the fact that they're included in the process, right? People like to have their input valued, and so that's going to lead to higher motivation. In addition to the fact there's just more realistic goal, and now they can meet that, and they're more motivated to try and achieve it. And then you also get the benefit of, in the situation that the frontline manager, if they collaborate with the CEO to come up with these numbers. So let's say they come up with 20,000, right? So they collaborate and they come up with 20,000, and the sales manager thinks, hey, that's more realistic, right? So if the sales manager doesn't meet the 20,000, the sales manager can't come back and say, well, you know what, that was an unrealistic figure to begin with. I didn't have any input on the process, right? Because they were included. Now, with traditional budgeting, right, the sales manager could say, hey, look, I wasn't consulted about this 50,000, and in fact, I never thought we could meet it, so it's not my fault. But with the collaborative approach, it's like, look, we all came together, we collaborated to come up with this number, and you agreed, and you didn't meet it. So therefore, now we've got some penalties or something, or it has to do with whether or not they get a bonus. So there's all these advantages we think about like in terms of the greater accuracy and the higher motivation, the psychological benefit that they get from being included, and then of course, the fact that they're held more responsible for the fact that they help come up with these numbers. And you might say, well, why aren't all organizations adopting this participative budgeting method? Why is traditional budgeting still around? Because in fact, traditional budgeting is still very, very popular. This idea of setting targets or just profit targets and saying meet this or otherwise you're going to have a problem. So it just seems weird. It seems counterintuitive, and there's a major reason that let me just scroll down a little bit. There's a major reason that this is still around, that traditional budgeting, so to speak, is still around, and that's the idea of budgetary slack. Right? This is a major issue, major challenge with participative budgeting is budgetary slack. And basically the idea is this. If you give the frontline manager the ability to have input on what the budgeted numbers are going to be, they have an incentive to build slack into the system. And what I mean by slack is this. So let's say that the sales manager, right in our example, we said realistically if the sales manager tried hard, in the sales manager's mind, they could get 20,000 units in sales, right? So that's ideally where the target should be set, right? 20,000. Because if the sales manager works hard, they can get this. They believe that. It's realistic. But if that's the case, the sales manager might say, you know what, when they're consulted, they might say, you know what, I think I can get 15,000 units. Right? So if the CEO goes to the sales manager, says, how many units can you sell? Even if the sales manager thinks it's 20,000, they might say 15,000 because they're trying to protect themselves. It's kind of like, hey, look, I don't know what could happen. There could be some catastrophe. There could be some kind of problem. It might be that my employees don't work, or the frontline workers under the manager don't work as hard, or there's some kind of issue that the sales manager wants to protect him or herself, and they say, well, let me just say, you know what, I think we could do 15,000 units, right? Because the CEO doesn't know, right? Remember, the CEO is collaborating and saying, okay, you've got better information than me. Where should we set the target? Frontline manager says 15,000. But then it's like, okay, now when the frontline manager gets 20, then it's like the frontline manager looks good, right? Because they're like, hey, we set it for 15 and I got 20. I think I should get a bonus, right? And then, you know, the CEO is none the wiser because they didn't know. They were just trusting the information from the frontline manager. So you could see where this idea of building slack into the system is a legitimate threat. Now, you might say, well, who cares, right? Why does this matter? What does it matter if they say 15 and they get 20? They got the 20 regardless, so we're better off, right? Well, here's the problem. So when you introduce slack into the system, so let's take this example a little further. Let's play it out. So let's say that this is actually what happens. So the actual amount that the sales manager thinks they're going to get is 20,000, right? But then they say, you know what, it's going to be 15, and they're just hoping to surprise the boss, right? So when they do this, when they say this 15, that 15,000 goes into the sales budget, right? That number is put into the sales budget for, let's say, first quarter sales, Q1 sales. So they're expecting 15,000 units. But here's the thing, the sales budget is used by them it's not just used by the sales manager, right? It's then used by the production department, right? The production department makes a production budget. And what do they use? They use the sales figures, right? They use the forecast of 15,000 when they're coming up with a production budget of how many units to produce, right? That's an input. So now they say, okay, you know what? We're going to produce based on an expectation that we're going to sell 15,000 units. But the reality is, unbeknownst to these production people, is really probably going to be more like 20,000 units, right? So then the 20,000 happens, and then the production department is like, hey, we were expecting 15. We weren't ready for 20. We're 5,000 units short. Now all of a sudden customers are demanding, they say they purchased the product, and now we've got a shortage. We've got a stock out. So now customers are angry. Hey, I bought this. It didn't arrive. And now the CEO comes in and says to the sales manager, hey, what happened? What happened here? You told me it was going to be 15, and then now it's 20. So now we've got a problem because Slack was built into the system, and it ends up affecting other departments, other budgets. It's got like this whiplash effect. And so this is a real problem. So what you want in a perfect world, you want this collaboration, right? You don't want to just throw your hands up and say, no, we'll just go back to the CEO dictating to people what these numbers are. You want the collaboration, but you're going to need a little policing, a little bit of scrutinization, right? Scrutinizing, right? So you need the CEO to kind of come in here and say, okay, look, I'm not just going to take every number that you give me at face value. They're scrutinizing some of this to make sure that we're avoiding, slack being built into the system. And maybe the CEO sets up some kind of reward system to incentivize the sales manager to truthfully report what they believe the sales are going to be. Maybe if they misreport, if they keep underreporting what the sales are, maybe they get penalized somehow. So in any event, you don't want to throw out this collaborative approach simply because of the idea of Slack, but you need to be cognizant of Slack and how managers, frontline managers, have an incentive to build it into the system, and you have to design a system that would help scrutinize this and avoid try and keep Slack out of the system.